Welcome to the Get Published podcast, sponsored by Brodie Consulting Group. To get more information about our coaching, publishing, executive ghostwriting, and podcast production services, go to getpublishedpodcast.com. Hello, I am Paul Brodie, and thank you for joining us for another episode of the Get Published podcast, where we help authors get published with a proven system that works. Today, we're being joined by Jason Johnson, author of The 40-Day Fire, Burning Away All That Does Not Resemble Your Destiny. Jason, welcome to the show.
Hey, Paul, thanks for having me.
Are you ready to get started?
Sure, yeah, let's get into it.
All right, question number one. What is the one piece of advice that you would give to a first-time author who is currently writing their book?
You know, Paul, there's so many different things that I could say. It's hard to narrow it down into just one thing, but what I would say really is don't rush it. You know, don't rush the process. I know that can be counterintuitive to, you know, people who would just say, you know, don't spend too much time speculating or, you know, doing unnecessary prolonging of the project. But I do want to say that one thing that I learned from publishing my book was that you really want to pay attention to the smaller details of everything, making sure that your book is exactly the way that you want it to be. Because one thing that I had to do a couple of times before I launched it officially, even when I had it just set up in the queue to launch as a print as well as an ebook, I noticed that there was a couple of errors that I had missed because I just wanted it to be out there, you know, and I really wanted it to be out as soon as possible. So I really had to take some time to just, you know, step back and say, okay, I need to do a thorough read of everything just to make sure that I'm not missing something. And I was able to, after doing that, catch some big mistakes that I'm glad I was able to catch before actually publishing it. But I would say definitely, you know, take your time with the process, make sure that it's something that you're going to be proud of when you put it out. And also really just, you know, being prepared for positive and negative criticism that people are going to have, because, you know, just like how we have our favorite authors and we have particular books that we enjoy, and it's the same with our audience as well. There's going to be some stuff that we write that they're going to think is a classic, and there's going to be other stuff that we write that they're going to think is just a waste of space in the earth. They're going to say, I wish that you had never put that out. You just totally ruined my life by releasing this book, right? So people are going to have all types of comments. Then again, you're going to have some people that are going to say, wow, your book changed my life. I'm so glad that you put it out. So the biggest thing is really you can't please everybody. You know, some people are going to love your stuff. Some people are going to hate your stuff. And some people are just going to be indifferent to it. But I think the people who really matter are the people who hate your stuff and the people who really love your stuff, because that extreme on either end, I think, is a positive. So don't even look at super negative criticism as a negative, because honestly, it's something that is going to challenge you as a writer. Maybe they're going to point out something to you that's really important, you know, something that you just need to take note of and say, okay, that person's right. It may hurt your pride at first to hear that, but you might say, okay, let me, you know, keep that in mind the next time I'm writing something. Maybe there's some sort of, you know, cultural insensitivity on your part or something like that you never would have even thought of. So, you know, just, you know, take everything with a grain of salt, good or bad, and just know that, you know, ultimately it's your first book. It's a learning experience. Your second book, your third book, your fourth book, and so on. It's only going to get better and better from there.
And what do you feel is the hardest part about getting published?
Yeah, I think the hardest part is, you know, motive. Really understanding what your motive is, you know, before you even get to the point of publishing your book, because you might be looking at this as a get-rich-quick scheme or something and say, okay, I've heard of people, you know, becoming best-selling authors on their first book, and then they're set for life, and they can quit their job right after they release their book, and, you know, everything is just fine. But, you know, it doesn't always work out that way. Sometimes it does, but sometimes it doesn't. And you know, one thing to keep in mind is, you know, there's a couple different forms of publishing. You can either self-publish or you can go with a traditional publisher. And I don't think that either or is better than the other because both have pros and cons. But one thing that I would say is that when you are with a major publisher, one thing to keep in mind is your book is going to definitely reach more people that way. But at the same time, you have to split those royalties that you receive from the book. So, you might think, well, I sold 500,000 copies of my book, so I'm going to get this amount of money. But, you have to keep in mind that you do have to share that. And with self-publishing, even if your marketing efforts and everything proved to not make you the type of money that you thought you were going to make, I think that one thing you have to realize is that ultimately, this is an opportunity for you to build your brand, to showcase your brand to other people, because there's going to be people that hear about you from writing this book that never would have heard about you. So whether you make money directly from that book or not, you may make it indirectly because of the advertising for whatever your area of expertise is. That's going to cause people to know more about you. And so, like, think of it like this. Like, I'd rather write a good book and give it away to 1,000 people for free than to write a horrible book and, charge $35 per copy to 1 million people. But what I wrote was garbage. I'd rather it be quality and connect with people. And I think that if you have that as your focus, then you won't have to worry about the monetary aspect of it. It'll work out for you in the right time.
Let's talk about marketing. So please share a marketing strategy that you have used in your book launch that has worked well.
Okay. One thing that was really helpful with launching my book, The 40-Day Fire, earlier this year was that I have a philosophy podcast that I've been doing now for a little bit over a year, and it's called For the Love of Wisdom. And really that title comes from the word philosophy, because the word philosophy comes from root words philo and sophos. And both of those words mean, well, philo means love, sophos means wisdom. So when you put those two together, it literally means love of wisdom. So that's why I titled the show For the Love of Wisdom. And on each episode, I tackled different philosophical topics, but in a non-academic sense. It's something that I wanted to make philosophy relatable to people who think that they wouldn't normally be into it. I have music and other elements that make the show interesting. And then, by the way, that podcast is available, on iTunes, Spotify, and different places like that, wherever you enjoy listening to podcasts. But to answer your question, though, one of the biggest ways for me to market my book, The 40-Day Fire, was on the podcast. Also by appearing on other people's podcasts, just like this one. And another big way that I promoted the book was through an accompanying lecture series that I created based upon the themes of the book. It was called the 40-Day Fire Lecture Series. And I was actually fortunate enough earlier this year to share a part of my lecture series. I was invited by the office of Muriel Bowser, who's the mayor of Washington, D.C., to share at the annual AmeriCorps conference that was held in D.C. this past January. And it was really a great way just to, share about my book, and also just to get new readers of it, because I offered my book for free to all the conference attendees, basically to anybody who wanted it. I gave them the option to either receive my book as an ebook or as an audiobook. And I really believe that as effective as internet marketing is, I'm definitely 100% in favor of internet marketing. I did use some of that to promote my book as well. But I really believe that nothing beats just having a face-to-face interaction with people and, marketing your book in person. Because when people feel like, they can meet you, such as at a book signing or at a conference or any other kind of event, or even just, talking to someone on the street, they really feel like they can connect with you. And sometimes it makes them that much more eager to read your book because they met you.
Well, One thing I wanted to touch on a bit more was about creating a lecture series from your book. So you took certain
Sure.
elements and then you turned those into different lectures. What was your strategy? Because we've had guests on the show that have taken their entire talks from specifically for the entire book, but I haven't really heard too much about some authors taking just certain elements and turning those elements into a lecture series.
Yeah, so the lecture series that I shared at the AmeriCorp concert conference was really the introduction to the lecture series. But I put it together similar to how a college professor would put together a course. I had a PowerPoint presentation that did an overview of what I thought were the most important topics of the book, and really just helping people to see, just breaking it down a little bit farther than what was offered in the book, just to show more specifically how you can apply the principles in the book to everyday life. So that was just the introduction of the lecture series. And then beyond that, there's actually a lecture specifically for each chapter of the book. And the way that the book is stylized, it's a 40-day devotional. So the lecture series, not including the introduction lecture, is actually 40 lessons that really go much more in depth into each of the topics. I also am working on a video series for the 40-day fire, which there's a video for each chapter in the book as well, just to give people more of a visual, and just to really drive the points home. Because my goal with this, because this book to me is very important, because like it says, the 40-day fire, it's really about lighting a fire up under you. If you are feeling complacent, or you're at that place where you say, you know what, I really need to stop thinking about it and just start doing it. That's what it's all about. And I really enjoyed being able to expound upon the book by turning it into a lecture series. And I think that people who are familiar with the book, and even people who have never heard of it, really appreciate just being able to look at it in a much more, I guess more of a academic sense.
Well, let's talk about your favorite book. So, what is your favorite book, and what was the number one thing that you learned from it?
I have so many books that I've enjoyed, throughout my life. I feel like at every point in my life, there's one book that specifically, really speaks to me and helps me during that time period. But one book that comes to mind that I know was very influential to me was a book written by Dr. Ben Carson, and it's called Gifted Hands. And Gifted Hands is Ben Carson's autobiography, and he talks about how he grew up in Detroit, and it seemed like the odds were stacked up against him, but how he was able to overcome that with the help of his mother and other important people in his life, such as his older brother. And he was actually able to go from the inner city of Detroit to becoming one of the world's most recognized neurosurgeons. He worked at Johns Hopkins Hospital for many years, before eventually running for president and going into different ventures. But one thing that really stood out to me in the book was he talked about how education wasn't really that important to him at one point. He got bad grades in school. He was getting into fights. He was doing a lot of things that were putting him on a more destructive path. And that was something that I could really relate to, as far as just not feeling like I had a lot of direction in life at one point. And I didn't really understand the importance of getting a good education and how that would affect my life as an adult. But I remember reading his book and him talking about how he put everything into studying. He didn't make any excuses because of the workload, especially when he was in medical school. And medical school can be very taxing and everything. But he decided to, no matter what, he was going to do the best that he possibly could. And he graduated at the top of his class, many times in both high school and in college. And before I went to college, I remember that book was so influential to me, because it made me say, if I'm going to go to college, if I'm going to invest all of this money, I want to make sure that I do the very best that I possibly can. And I don't want to just, do it half-heartedly. I really want to get the most out of my education. And so that's how, I think that book was really influential, and I can definitely say it's one of my all-time favorites.
And for a final question, what is your favorite quote and why?
I think my favorite quote would have to be one from another one of Ben Carson's books. His book is called Think Big. And I think that's just an awesome quote in and of itself. Think big. Don't be limited in what you can think of, what you can imagine for yourself, for your family, for your children. Don't limit yourself based upon whatever your current circumstances are, but just know that ultimately you can think yourself out of any bad situation and into any good situation by proper planning and, just not having a self-defeated mindset, because I think that success and failure both start in the mind. And if we can get our minds right, and if we can learn to think bigger than where we currently are, then there's no limit to where we can go in life.
Well, Jason, I want to thank you for being a guest on this show. What is the best way for people to find you online?
Okay, definitely. And it's my pleasure to be here today with you, Paul. I really enjoyed being on the show. If people want to find me, they can find me either by going to my website, which is www.oneplanmedia.com, which is also the home of my book publishing company, which is One Plan Media Publishing Group. And so you can find me on oneplanmedia.com, and that's one as in ONE, Plan Media. And then you could also find me on Instagram, Twitter, pretty much all of the known social media sites, and the handle is at One Plan Media, ONE Plan Media.
Jason, thank you once again for being on the show, and I wish you all the best in your author journey ahead.
Okay, thanks a lot. I appreciate it.
Thanks again for joining us today. To learn more about how you can be featured in our brand new Get Published business book, go to getpublishedpodcast.com.